Thanks for joining us for this live music mixing for Spatial Audio Soundsystems 1 hour session. I'm Bill Brooks from Brooks Audio. Just a quick initially bit about me. This picture was taken at D&B Audio Technics headquarters in the UK, mixing some content for a soundscape production. And I've had 20 years approximately experience in lots of different roles in the industry. Spatial sound designer, doing R&D, doing system design, mixing, lots of mixing, engineering, A1 roles predominantly, but also monitors and various other bits and pieces for music and corporate. I've been a musician with lots of releases as well, electronic music across a range of different genres, and then I like to do sound to picture work as well, and particularly been involved with some really great ethical film productions in the last few years, and creating education packages like this one. So yeah, feel free to check out brooksaudio.co.uk for a bit more information on what I do and for some resources on there, or just drop me a line, bill@brooksaudio.co.uk. Or check out my socials. Great. Okay, so those of you who saw the 10-minute taster will have had this bit already, but here's a bit of a recap if you did, and if you didn't, then this will be new to you. Let's imagine we've got an acoustic situation where we have a jazz band playing in a room with no amplification, just acoustic. We've got an audience there. Well, every audience member has their own relationship acoustically to each instrument. So this person over on the left can localize the saxophone with the blue arrow there from the sax position, as it has a different path length to the listener compared to the trumpet, but then crucially each instrument has a different path length to each ear of the listener as well. So the listener can binaurally unmask what's happening in the room. So some people call this the cocktail party effect, where if you're in a busy room with lots of people chatting, you can hone in on a conversation that's happening across the room. And there's maybe a little bit of lip reading that goes on with this, but there's also quite a large amount of the ear-brain system binaurally unmasking that conversation. But yeah, the eyes do feed into the ear-brain system as well, and so that they're all working together to create an image. And of course, in an acoustic environment, this feels very natural, as we all know from sitting round a campfire, listening to an acoustic guitar, or going and listening to a choir, or something like that, where you can really hear each instrument very clearly, even in a complex combination of sources in an acoustic environment like a choir. You can just hone in on a single person singing and isolate their voice from everybody else's. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then next time you're in that environment, give it a go. So the another person in the audience has a different relationship to each of those performers, but they can equally binaurally unmask that situation, and they have their own experience there. So when the saxophone starts playing some little interesting kind of riffy solo-y bits, you can just listen to that, and you can really effectively, you start to mix in your head. Basically, you can raise the level or raise the perception of a certain instrument in your own brain by just thinking, I'd like to listen to that one a bit more, please, brain. So yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and it makes acoustic music extremely enjoyable for that and a number of other reasons. So the green bar at the bottom represents good localization for all of the audience, because they can all unmask this situation. So when the audience gets bigger and we need to amplify this band, most of the time what happens is we get a pair of speakers plonked left and right, and all of these instruments get fed through those speakers. Now, unfortunately, wherever you're standing, the closest loudspeaker becomes the source of localization. So we cure one problem in terms of getting it loud enough for everybody to hear, or to get over the level of the background noise of everyone chatting in a large audience, but we destroy the imaging and the localization for each of these people off to the sides. And the only people who really get any decent kind of imaging are the people in the middle, like the sound engineer often. And if the sound engineer is panning those instruments left and right on the mixer using level panning through the master bus, then you get a little bit of pseudo stereo information if you're in the middle, but only about 5% of the audience get that information. Everybody else has a bad experience in terms of imaging. So the solution comes with a lot of different manufacturers by adding more speakers, and that's what they love to hear, that you want more speakers. They love selling you speakers. Doesn't matter who they are, which brand you're talking about, more speakers equals more money for them. But yeah, so if we can now reinforce the image by using an object, now she can still hear that saxophone coming from there, and she can still hear that the trumpet coming from over there. The level has been reinforced, but also the image has been reinforced as well. So the speakers are working on two kind of levels in terms of, I suppose, in terms of volume and in terms of time, really, ultimately. So you're getting localization and you're getting increased level from the system without trashing that kind of natural experience that we were having before from the acoustic perspective. And the same can be said for this person over here. And we'll talk about what it means to have an object in a short while. And that's effectively what happens. What we're dealing with is object-based audio when we're talking about these systems. So everybody, again, we move back to everybody having a good experience in terms of imaging. Okay, so what can we put into these kind of systems, these spatial systems? Can it just be microphones? Well, no, there can be a number of different things that can be sources going into the system. Could use microphones, we can use DI boxes, effects, DAW tracks, playback. In our demo today, we'll listen to playback, but of course these other sources can be live, they can be prepared. Yeah, there's not really any kind of limit as to what you put through the system. So yeah, that's what's going in. So let's take, for example, a microphone. Now this is a traditional system. So if we're plugging the microphone in to a stage box, then the stage box goes to the desk. So often that's via a audio over IP protocol these days. An Ethernet cable gets plugged between the stage box and desk, and that carries the signal from the microphone across the multi-core into the desk. Now in a traditional left-right system, that all those sources, all those different sources we just talked about beforehand, whether it's mics, DIs, etc., they get mixed together on those different channels in the desk and sent to the master bus. And the master bus goes to the speakers. Most of the venues around that you will go to will operate in that way. If we're talking about a spatial audio system, it's slightly different. You have a microphone. This bit's the same, going into the stage box, which gets fed to the desk. So each of those channels goes into a separate channel on the desk. But this time there's another processor in between, and it would be the spatial audio processor. The output of the processor will go to the speakers. So now, in a normal situation, a left-right situation with the master bus, you've got things like graphic EQ, compression, etc., that you can insert onto the master bus, and that sends to the left and right. Whereas with a spatial audio processor, now you have direct outs going into the spatial audio processor from the console, and that then gets distributed out to the speaker array. So in this case, we've got kind of a left, center, right, left surround, right surround, so sort of like a 5-channel surround setup. But obviously that can be totally flexible. That's just as long as what the processor thinks is happening and what is really happening in reality, as long as the processor knows where the speakers are and how many there are, then it can distribute those channels in an effective way. The problem comes when, well, how do we insert, or one of the problems, or one of the things that most engineers would ask is, where do we insert things like graphic EQ and compression, bus effects, and can we use drum buses and things like that? Well, that's an interesting question, and that's probably maybe a little bit more advanced than this workshop is kind of designed to be, but that's an interesting question. Those processors will have EQ and compression. Some of them have an available compression, but yeah, in some ways that's an interesting question for the console manufacturers, and it will be interesting to see as the next generations of console come to the market, whether those multi-channel processes are considered as part of the busing in the console. At the moment, it really isn't. So you have to be quite inventive with how you do your bus processing, etc. So yeah, but again, probably a little bit outside of the realms of this workshop, but interesting to think about it anyway. And maybe if anybody's got any questions on that level in the Q&A, we can chat about it then. So, looking at different surround formats, you've got a couple of different things which you're likely to encounter in the world, really. So, channel-based surround is really building on stereo. So you could refer to stereo as a spatial audio system because it's creating that pseudo stereo setup. And what we're really doing by building a channel-based surround system is adding extra speakers to a stereo setup to give us a bit more better localization of sounds. And of course, very often where you'll find a 5.1 system would be in a cinema or in a maybe in a living room or a gaming setup potentially, and these are very useful, particularly cinema, where the center channel is used for the dialogue because that's behind the screen, and that's kind of printed. So that's the thing about channel-based surround, is that all of those speakers that you see have a dedicated channel for them and assigned to them. So when the content is mixed or made for that setup, it's very much important that it's replayed on exactly the same setup that it's made by. So if you're missing the center channel, for example, in a film showing, if you're trying to play 5.1 but you're missing the center channel, then all the dialogue will be missing from the audience's perspective. So that's one of the big problems with channel-based surround, is it's not very flexible. So the in format has to be the same as the out format in order for it to work. So here we have a 5.1, or if, let's say this is a 5.1. We're not seeing the sub here, but we've got the 5 satellites here, and each one of those satellites has its own printed audio track, which is very specifically designed for each speaker. So the advent of object-based surround helps to counteract some of the issues with channel-based surround. Each instrument track or each source is kept separate in the encoded multi-channel file, and each instrument has some metadata associated with it to say where it should be at a certain point. And the box that's in the listening room, wherever the audience are, the decoder, needs to know where the speakers are and how many of them there are, so that it can map that object to the correct output or series of outputs in order to create an image for the listener to hear. So where the object is determines which speakers are being used. And the great thing about that is that it's flexible. So if you lose one speaker in the system, like the center speaker, you remove that from the decoder's speaker plan, and it will compensate by just sending audio out to the other speakers, that audio out to the other speakers, and so you're not going to lose any content. So with object-based surround, it should be said as well that channel-based surround content can be superimposed onto an object-based surround setup. So it doesn't have to be either. You can have objects as well as channel-based in an object audio system. So interesting to see how that works. So if we had a 5-channel system and we wanted to put an object over here, so that listener perceived the object is coming from their left, well, the engine would say that these two are the most appropriate in order to play that. And by playing a combination of level and time through those speakers, it creates a pseudo stereo, if you like, to say that object is coming from in between the two speakers over in the distance there. The cool thing comes when you add some extra speakers. So if we moved up to a 7-channel surround system, now we update our decoder and we tell it, actually, we've added some side speakers in. We've increased the resolution of our speakers. Now, when that object appears and the engine, the content wants us to perceive that object as coming from over there, now the engine says, well, this one is clearly the best one to use. And then we get a really strong image coming from in between those speakers. You're not relying on any kind of pseudo image. You've got a very strong direct sound coming from that speaker. Okay, so most of these examples so far have been kind of aimed at the home listener, but very much similar to this theory is the way that the live audio systems work. The main difference being that they're very low latency, so they're designed for you to be able to position these objects in real time and then hear the result immediately. Obviously, we need very low latency to create a believable image, and also not to upset the performer on the stage as well. If you had very high latency, like a long delay between them playing and the sound coming out of the speakers, then that would be very off-putting for the performer as well as for the audience. So yeah, fundamentally these kind of ideas are the same for live sound as they are for cinema or listening to Dolby Atmos music, for example. So another big difference in the live world is that obviously we have live inputs. In cinema and in music, recorded music, there's no live inputs. It's all pre-done. So in the live world, we would have we've seen our signal flow. Just a quick recap of that. So we have the microphone going into the stage box, which goes into the desk, into the processor, and that feeds out to the speakers. Now, for my example that I'm going to do today, we've got a slightly different setup where we've got a DAW playing over USB into a desk, and that's taking the place of the stage box and the microphones. It's a pre-recorded live track, multi-track, which, yeah, there is, there's even some spill between the instruments as well, as you'll hear. So it's quite a useful kind of multi-track in terms of simulating a live performance. That goes into the desk, and then the desk goes output via Dante into Elisa Studio, which is running on another laptop, and then that feeds out via analog to your headphones and mine as well while I'm doing this workshop. So, speaking of which, it's time to put your headphones on. If you don't have headphones, pause this video and go and find some, please, and plug them in, because it's very important to listen to a binaural effect on headphones. And here we go. Okay, so a quick overview of what is happening in the system. We've got Ableton playing on one laptop, and that is over USB connected to the SQ6 console. So each of the tracks in Ableton are played through each one of these channels, 9 channels on the desk. So that the input routing, I don't know if you can see, is USB 1 to 9. And the output routing of Ableton is outputs, sound card external outputs 1 to 9. We then, each track comes into a channel, and we're simulating what you would have in the context of a gig, where every channel would have a separate input obviously in a gig situation, they would be coming from the preamps. So they'd be coming from the stage box, or maybe from an analog multi-core, which is connected to the back of the desk. But either way, you'd have preamps coming in to the desk. Because we have USB, we don't have any preamp. So I can show you this in the control software for the SQ. So we have preamp first, and then we'd have a high pass filter. Obviously, good practice with live microphones to put a high pass filter in, because you reduce rumble from the stage. Then we've got the option of a gate, an insert to insert an effect, or a processor there. We've got parametric EQ per channel, and we've got compression per channel. So we go through all of those, and if we have a little look at the way that the routing works, so if we go to the I/O patch actually, and we can see for the input channels, they're coming from USB here. Actually 1 through 10 is patched, but we're only using 9 inputs, and they are patched 1 to 1. So input 1 from USB goes to acoustic guitar channel 1, etc. It goes via all the processing, which we just talked about. So via all of that processing there. And then the routing is that because we're using a spatial audio system, rather than routing to the master bus, as we would normally do in a stereo system or a left-right system, that master bus is disabled, and that is not being sent there. Instead, we're using a direct output from each channel. So the channel is set to, the direct out source is set post delay, which means that it's post all of the things, the channel strip that we just talked about, and post any delay that you would add to that particular channel. And it's also set to follow the fader, follow the mute, etc. So when you're mixing with a given channel, it behaves like it would be if you were sending it to a bus, i.e. the fader changes the volume, the mute works, etc. But actually that audio is being routed out of the direct out, and then we can see on our I/O patch here, the outputs are routed for each one of the direct outputs. They're routed to the Dante port, and the Dante is patched 1 to 1 as well. That Dante is then sent to the Elisa Studio. So we then see on Elisa Studio, well, if we look at the Elisa processor, which is basically the audio interface for Elisa, we play a little bit of audio. If I play just this first channel, you can see the input there coming in on input 1 and going out of 1 and 2, and those, so inputs coming from the desk, output is going to our sound card with our headphones plugged in, because we're doing a binaural render from Elisa Studio. And that then is routed in to the Elisa Studio, and we can see in our sources view that audio coming in for acoustic guitar 1. Now, you can hear some vocals on that as well, but that's because there's some spill from where this was recorded. By the way, this is a Telefunken multi-track, which is okay to be used for educational purposes, which this is an educational video. So yeah, I went for something kind of basic. It's acoustic guitars, some keys and some vocals, nothing too strenuous to mix, just to give us, not to give us too much to do, and to focus more on the tool set rather than on the content, if you like. So what would we do? Well, first of all, we could start to spatialize the content. So when you're mixing on a spatial audio system, you generally would find that you need a bit less compression, EQ, those kind of things, because you've got more space, because you've got more speakers and you've got more of a distributed system. You're moving back towards being able to binaurally unmask what's happening in the room, like you would with an acoustic situation. We don't have EQ and compression in acoustic world, but we get by quite happily when we're listening to an acoustic band without any processing. because we've got this binaural situation, and we can use our ear-brain system to kind of unmask what's going on. So we don't need to do all that kind of forcing things down the wire, forcing things into the bus that we would have to do normally with a left-right setup. So yeah, so let's do some spatialization first. So if we look at the soundscape view in Elisa, and I just play a bit of audio, I'm just going to position each one of these sounds. So first of all, starting out with the acoustic guitar, I'm going to put that over to the left side. And actually you can hear that if you've got your headphones on, you should be able to hear that moving around, and depending on how close your ear, your head, your HRTF, your head is to the average head size. So if we look in settings and we look at the binaural settings here, we can see that L Acoustics have got an average head size, which they've modelled their binaural algorithm on, and I'm going to leave those settings based on their default, because hopefully it is an average for everybody who's listening to this tutorial. So yeah, we're going to leave that set on that. So depending on how close your actual physicality is to that average will depend on how effective this is. But let's have a listen to see how it sounds when we move it behind us. So yeah, that's what happens when we move it behind us. When we move the object further away from us, a number of different things happen, and that depends on what settings we've got. So as a default, you reduce the gain. The system reduces the gain, and it reduces the high frequency a little bit to simulate high frequency air absorption. So I'm going to just move that now, and you'll hopefully hear that in effect. Now it's debatable how useful that is. I'll just try that again. There we go. Yeah, it's debatable how useful that is in a music environment. It's really good for theatre production and things like that, where you want the actor to kind of get a bit quieter as they move away, and maybe a little bit of high frequency. You can actually turn that off. So you can, in this menu, you can see lots of different options for the different sources. In the processing view, you can turn off the distance gain if you want to, and you can turn off the attenuation. So then now that will sound something like this. Where was it you had to go? So that basically negates all the effects. Now, if you want to, you can actually add delay to a certain source, and you can have it dynamic. So as you move it off into the distance, the delay time increases. So that allows you to build depth into your mix that you wouldn't normally get from a left-right mix. So I would quite, in a real gig situation, I would definitely experiment with that setup, because you have a physical distance from yourself to each band member. So if you can work out where they are in relation to the depth of the stage, and you can put in an appropriate delay time, you can get an increased sense of depth. So ideally what you're wanting to do is get the object where the microphone is in relation to the speaker line at the front of the stage, and then you get that extra depth. So let's have a little play. Look, we'll push it all the way back, and then this depends on how big our sound stage is set in the settings when we build the stage. But yeah, with these particular settings in this default project, that delay time is 30 milliseconds, and as you move it closer, you find that delay time would reduce. So that's quite handy. I'm not going to turn that off for now, but it's useful to know that exists. So we've got positioning. I'm going to leave the distance and attenuation off for this example, and high frequency attenuation off in this sense. But yeah, we also have the option of doing reverb. So as we move our object closer or further away, it will determine whether the reverb is an early cluster or a late reverb. So I'm going to actually leave that on because when we add our reverb, it will depend on the depth of the objects as to kind of what the reverb sounds like. So some of the ones further away will sound a bit more distant because they'll use a bit more of a diffuse reverb, which is quite a nice thing to do. So not getting ahead of ourselves, let's just position these objects first. So that's acoustic guitar 1. By the way, here's a list at the bottom of the sources that we've got. So as we go through and listen through all the sources, we'll hear. So this is going to be acoustic guitar 2. There we go, that's channel 2. Okay, and we can select those from this list. Or we can go through selecting them from here. We could also just zoom it on, just identify just that one object as well if we want to. So that sometimes helps when you've got a busy session and you've got lots and lots of different objects. Using that little eye, you can select one or more objects and zoom in on them. So what's on channel 3? Okay. Okay, so that's keys. I'm going to put that off to the side. Make that super wide. So what you find in spatial audio mixing, this sounds okay on headphones, but it would sound a lot better if we had a full speaker array in front of us. So what we often find when we're mixing in spatial audio is that if you put things behind you and you're in a large room, if you imagine that this is a hall and it's 30 by 30 meters, for example, and we've got a speaker system all the way around. If we put percussive or sounds that have a rhythmical element to them at the back of the room, it's fine if you're in the middle because you have an equal relationship to all the speakers around you. But if you have somebody standing at the back of the room and they're right next to the speaker that's reproducing, or the speakers that are reproducing object number 3, then their physical relationship means that speaker is louder, and it also happens sooner because they're physically close. So the physics, the speed of sound, means that they have a closer relationship to this speaker. So they hear this earlier than it should do, and they hear the sound from the front later than the person in the middle. So you end up with a rhythmical bit of a mess, really. So tends to be that we use the rear speakers in music often for effects, reverbs, pads and things like delay, or pads, things that are less, or strings, things that have a less of a rhythmical nature, and things that are more sustained tend to work well at the back. But yeah, generally you would avoid putting rhythmic sounds at the back. You usually try to kind of bunch them towards the front. And what I often think is that it's nice to kind of think of the soundstage now as like a 180 in front of you, a full 180 degrees around, sort of wrapping around you at the front. And that gives you a much wider soundstage than you would have with a normal left-right PA. If you imagine that that's something like that, left and right, those two, this one and this one, would be your left-right, where you got a much, much wider kind of soundstage now for your instruments. And this works really well. So this is object 4. So I'm just going to go to 4. That is also a piano. Where is that? That's playing now. Okay, and then we've got a vocal. Going to leave that one in the middle. Thinking about the wrongs I could right. Okay, cool. So I'm going to listen to those 5 channels together. There we go. Where was it you had to go? Pulling down heavy snow. so I'm going to do a little bit of tidying up on these. So I'm just going to introduce a bit of EQ and a bit of compression. So let's have a look at our channel. Let's have a look at processing for acoustic guitar 1. We're going to have a look at first of all, I'll look at the EQ. So I'm just going to put this EQ in. I've done a little bit of EQ on this already. So let's just listen to that on its own. So EQ. So we've got a bit of boxiness there which has come out, and a little bit of scratchiness. I'm going to put the compressor in as well. So let's have a look at the compression. So this is just going to tidy up when this guitar gets particularly loud. So like on this earlier section here, that's just going to pull that down. It's quite a low ratio, 2 to 1, and that's just tidying up that dynamic range on that guitar there. So yeah, second guitar. Let's do a little bit of EQ on that one. Get rid of some of that. Make a bit of space for the vocal in there. Okay, that sounds cool. Put a bit of compression in on that one as well. Just a bit of gentle compression just to tidy that up. Again, the compression and the EQ, it's not forcing things into the mix. It's designed to just to help to kind of tidy up the inadequacies in the miking or the so we're basically just cleaning up the channels rather than using the EQ and the compression to build the mix as much. We're trying to leave things dynamic and open as much as possible, and just use that compression and that EQ just to tidy things up a little bit. So yeah, let's have a listen to the keys. Okay, let's have a look at keys. A bit too bright, just pull that down a little bit. Obviously, yeah, high pass filter makes sense on this one. There's quite a lot of muddiness at the bottom. It's a very high-pitched instrument, so yeah, we have something like that. A little bit of compression just to tidy it up a bit. Maybe even a lower ratio. So yeah, we end up with a little bit of compression like that on that one. Okay, and then the other piano. Let's have a listen to that. There we go. Again. Here we go. Right, let's just whiz this back. Excuse me. Turn the EQ off. So that actually is part of that sound, I believe. So it's piano and tambourine, I think. Okay, so we'll leave that like that. That sounds cool.
Spend
vocal.
the rest of my life thinking about the wrongs I could right, but every moment I'm drawing
I'm going to put the high pass filter on that one. Okay. And then I'm going to whiz that back.
And where was it you had to go?
Put the put the EQ in.
Pulling that heavy stone.
There's a bit of sort of muddiness there.
Couldn't we've lightened the
Boxiness might bring the high pass filter down a bit more.
load.
Got a bit of,
And I could spend the rest of my life
little bit of harshness there, and
thinking
giving it
about
a
the
little bit
wrongs
of a
I could
boost
right.
in the top end, just to
Every
give it a bit more
moment
sparkle.
I'm drawing a line.
Compression-wise, try and tidy that up a little bit as well, because he's quite a dynamic singer.
And where was
not
it
too
you
bad.
had to go?
Oh, there we go. So
Pulling that
let's pull that
heavy
ratio down a
stone.
little bit, so it's a bit less.
Couldn't
Maybe
we've
increase the
lightened
attack
the
a little bit. There we go. That's sounding fairly neutral.
And I could spend the rest of my
Okay.
life
Okay, so let's have a listen to
about
those.
the wrongs I could right. But every moment I'm drawing a line.
Nice. Okay, let's carry on and see what else there is in this mix. So we've got another vocal here, which I believe is...
Where was it you had to go?
kind of like a chorus of vocals there.
Where was it you had to go? Pulling that heavy stone. Couldn't we land alone?
Female vocal.
And I could spend the rest of my life
Okay.
thinking about the wrongs I could right.
And a male.
I'm drawing a line.
Okay, let's position those either side. So I think vocal 2 has a harmonica on it, I believe. So I'm just going to put that off to one side. I'm just going to put the other vocals a little bit on the soundstage. Let's imagine that those players were playing the guitars. Okay, so you've got your lead singer in the middle. You've got your female backing vocal playing the main guitar, and your male vocal playing the second guitar. So I know it's not quite that, but let's say let's imagine that that's the setup. And we've tried to position those somewhere on the stage which relates to where they are physically, to kind of link in what we see and what we hear, much like that jazz band that we looked at in the example in the PowerPoint earlier on. So yeah, let's have a listen to them in those positions.
Go? Pulling that heavy stone. Couldn't we have lightened the load? And I can spend the rest of my life thinking about the wrongs I could right. But every moment I'm drawing a line.
Okay, so on channel 6, I believe there's a melodica, maybe in the intro. There we go. So what I might do actually there is I might make the melodica, just for fun, make the melodica move around in a circle. So we've got these effects that we can play with, and there's lots of different ones. You can, depending on what you want to do, you've got all these different options. So you can have a pan, you can actually see how they would look. They give you a really good visual indication of what they look like. So you can have some that move side to side, some that move forwards and backwards, some that will just randomly move objects around, which is probably good for electronic music. Some which do some sort of crazy other stuff. And yeah, they get increasingly crazy. But then you've also got the option to adjust the speed. So you can, if you want, sync to the master BPM if you want to. So you can change that. I know that this is 123 BPM, this song. So if we want, we could have 1 bar rhythm moving side to side, or we can just have a manual speed. You can also adjust how much the amplitude, how far this moves around at the front. So we could say, actually, let's slow it right down, and let's have it moving right out to the side. So now we've got our, this depends on where you position the object in the first place as to it. So it's relative to the original position of the object. So if we put that in the middle and then turn it on, then it will move out to that position, out to there, and then back to the same on the other side. Okay. So let's have the melodica moving like that, just for fun.
There's a scar
Nice.
on my arm from a fall on your bed.
Okay, great. Let's look at some effects now. So you've got well, it's called effects, this movement, this automation in Elisa, but you've also got reverb as well. So let's have a listen to some reverb. So as we saw before, reverb is enabled for all of the different sounds. So let's just listen first of all to the lead vocal and see how that sounds with the reverb. Let's find the section where he's singing in the middle.
And where was it you had to go?
So
Pulling that heavy stone. Couldn't we've lightened the load.
So at the moment we have a warm theatre. We can increase the size of that. We've got these different options. It is an algorithmic reverb, so you can change every aspect of it. It's not convolution where it's been captured from a certain room, which is how the D&B Audio-Technic soundscape system works. The algorithmic setup, which is Elisa, Timax as well, uses an algorithmic reverb. It gives you a bit more flexibility with the kind of pretense that it maybe sounds a little bit less real than a convolution reverb, but it gives you that flexibility to shape things however you like. But I really like.
And where was it you had to go?
Find that a bit too big. I think the medium theatre sounds good.
And where was it you had to go?
Sounds nice. We could try the studio.
And where was it you had to go?
No, I think we'll go for the warm theatre preset. Let's see what that sounds like with all the instruments in.
And where was it you had to go?
There we go. So actually, let's do that first. So that shows you, as I move him into the distance, we're not reducing the level. We're not reducing the high frequency, but we are changing the reverb characteristic, and it's moving into more of the cluster and the late reverb as you move the singer further away. So we can modify the reverb just by pushing them further into the distance.
And where was it you had to go?
So it's more intimate at the close.
Stone.
And it becomes more diffuse as we go further away, so that's quite nice.
And I could spend the rest of my life thinking about the wrongs I could right, but every moment I'm drawing a line.
You also can change things like distance using these controls at the bottom as well. So if you've got an object which is already moving like that one and you want to just increase the distance without affecting its path, you can do that with these controls down at the bottom. We also haven't talked about width, so you've got the option to spread these sounds. Now that on a real speaker system, that will give you, it basically shares the level across more speakers. So for something like the vocal, you've got the option of increasing the width here, and that will spread it further across those speakers at the front. So you'd end up with more level through all three of those speakers if you had a left, centre, right kind of setup above the stage, for example. So yeah, in terms of the binaural render, I'm not sure how that actually will sound. So let's have a listen.
And where was it you had to go? Pulling that heavy stone.
Doesn't really make any
Couldn't
difference
we've lightened the load
in the binaural. But yeah, on a real speaker system, you would notice that very much so. The only other thing which we have available to us, we've got a on channel 9. I've got a delay, which is coming from coming from Ableton. It could be coming from the desk, but actually it's coming from the Ableton project. So yeah, you've got the option to then add a source there, a delay, and color it, and then do all the things that we did for the previous one. So I'm just going to turn off those gain and high frequency attenuation. And I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to apply that full circle path to the delay. So that sounds something like this with the vocal.
And where was it you had to go? Pulling that heavy stone. Couldn't we've lightened the load?
Might just pull the reverb down a little bit.
And I could spend the rest of my life thinking about the wrongs I could right. But
and
every
we could do a little
moment
bit
I'm drawing
processing
a line.
So here we've got on the desk, you can see we've got our input 9. I'm going to call that delay. I'm going to apply the high pass filter and put that in.
Then your mom found a man and his boy found your bed.
Just thin it out a little
A broken doll, porcelain. He might as well have left you for dead. Then we grew up, you got lost out alone in a ditch.
There we go.
I wish that I knew
Thin that out
you
a little
then.
bit so it's not
I
so
wish I could have
dominant.
been your friend. Where was it you had to go? Pulling that heavy stone. Couldn't we've lightened the load? And I could spend the rest of my life thinking about the wrongs I could right. But every moment I'm drawing a line. Where was it you had to go? Pulling that heavy stone. Couldn't we've lightened the load? And I could spend the rest of my life thinking about the wrongs I could right. But every moment I'm drawing a line.
Okay, so we've been using Elisa Studio for the demo today, but there are lots of other live object or spatial audio systems out there, including D&B Audio Technics Soundscape, Timax, Spat, there's Code Space Hub, Adamson have got Fletcher Machine, Holophonics, and there's more as well. There are more that are not on the list. So yeah, I just wanted to give a quick rundown of a few different options. What's probably the more common ones that you'll see used in the industry. First of all, D&B Audio Technics Soundscape. So this is based on a simplified version of wavefield synthesis, where they're using time and level in order to create a wave front going into the room. It's 2D only, so it doesn't have a Z-axis, it can't do height. But it does have function groups with variable controls which allow for flexibility between different speaker groups. So really useful for things like front fills. It's really powerful how it can deal with front fills differently to the main system which is flown above it. for example. It has a convolution reverb, which is very realistic. It's called On Space. And apparently there's some Soundscape Studio software coming soon, which will be similar to the Elisa Studio. So watch this space, and hopefully will be also free. So Elisa we've been looking at today. This is based on vector-based amplitude panning, which means that it doesn't use delay for the positioning. And L Acoustics are quite vocal in their documentation about saying they don't think that delay works for this for panning. They don't think that it's the right way to go. So they very much based on amplitude panning. Level panning, in other words, but you can do variable delay per object, as we've seen, so to give your object depth in the mix. 3D panning is available, so you can use height as well. It's got lots of show control and automation features. It has one algorithmic reverb in contrast to Soundscape's convolution based reverb. And this makes it very much more editable. Soundscape's reverbs sound very realistic, but you can't edit them at all. You can only turn them off and on. And then, as we know, Elisa Studio software exists, and it's very user-friendly, and it also allows for offline programming, so you don't need one of these rather expensive hardware boxes in order to use Elisa. Timax is another option that you might see out there. This does time and level panning. It's extremely user configurable, so which we'll see in a minute. It could do multiple zones, so you could, in theory, do like a whole theme park or something with one processor and do all the zones within that, as long as you had enough outputs in order to do that. But yeah, it has a lot of expandability as well on the back, so you can add lots and lots of different interface options, where the others are a little bit more fixed in their interface options. This one does 4 different algorithmic reverbs, so you could have lots of different zones in an install, for example, and have a reverb assigned to each one. And they also have an introductory piece of software called PanLab, which is now available with the Timax logo on it, and that runs in QLab or will run alongside consoles like Yamaha QL1, Midas, the cheaper Midas consoles, various other more affordable small consoles as well. The Behringer X32 as well will run on. So yeah, this is worth looking at as a budget-friendly option. So let's have a quick look at D&B's software. So this is R1. And you'll see that this is really designed so that it can control the whole D&B system all in one piece of software. So you can control your amplifiers and your DS100, which is the Soundscape processor, all in one setup. So here we've got a page that controls the line array, for example. But then you have these positioning pages, and that allows you to move the objects around the system as we would have seen today with Elisa, very similar, except the big difference is that this is square, of course. So Elisa is always based on a circle, and you've always got that elliptical positioning. Soundscape is very much more designed to be done in meters, so you can get a very accurate position for your sources. If we have a quick look at Elisa controller, then we can see this is a much more complicated project, of course, obviously, with lots of sources. And if we go to the settings view, you can see here a larger speaker layout. This is Outernet in London, something I've done some sound design for. So you can see here how now if we look at the routing, or if we look at the speaker outputs, you can see lots of different outputs. So where we were just using 2 different outputs before, left and right for the binaural renderer, now here's a project that has lots and lots of speakers in it, and they're all routed to different outputs on the processor. And then yeah, you see how each speaker in that design has its own bar represented here, these bars. So as you move your sources around, they move through the speaker system, and this system has height as well, so we have the ability to move up and down as well. So you see the elevation control moving up and down there, because they have multiple layers of speakers available. You can also achieve some elevation in this install as well. Okay, so Timax is also coordinate based like the DS100. Okay, so Timax is also coordinate based, much like Soundscape. And here we can see the pan space, so you can move your object around. You can see at the bottom there the relationship between those different speakers, and you can see the delay times moving and the level changing as you add more delay and turn the level down as this moves side to side. So this is a good indication of how transparent Timax is. You can adjust those manually as well. Once you've got a position, you can also tweak it, which neither Elisa or Soundscape do. That's all hidden under the hood. So yeah, Timax is a lot more configurable than either of those other two options. And it also has a built-in timeline, which allows you to load content onto the processor, onto the sound hub, and play back tracks. So for things like an installation, that becomes really, really useful. It's got a very powerful cue function as well, so automation built in to Timax. So yeah, this is a really powerful alternative to the other two. They all have their pros and cons though, but yeah, I just wanted to do a quick walk through those. Thanks very much for listening today, and hope you've got something useful out of this introduction to spatial audio mixing. Look forward to seeing you in the Q&A. Thanks very much.